Great to be here. I think we're all wondering what the future lies before us as we start to open up our communities. I think that the COVID-19 vaccine has tremendous potential to assist us in doing this, but I've heard lots of hesitation, not just from non-healthcare workers, but also from healthcare workers, and I felt that it was important to address the concerns of this vaccine. Being a pediatrician as well, I am just going to put it out there, I am a proponent of vaccines, but there's a lot of interesting new technology related to this type of vaccine, and it portends a lot of potential in terms of what we can do with this technology to keep our community safe with regards to emerging pandemics. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It is a PowerPoint, and I have to say that as an ER physician, there are ways in which we kind of make light of things. I just want to put it out there that this is serious stuff, but at the same time, I do have some funny memes. I hope it doesn't offend anyone, but that's kind of how we deal with these tragedies sometimes. But anyway. So we're going to talk about the COVID-19 vaccine. The objectives are to go over the science of COVID-19 vaccine. And then we'll talk about the safety and efficacy. And then potentially the far-reaching benefits that COVID-19 vaccine can provide, as well as the future. But we're going to do it in the framework of the myths, because there's so many myths about it. I have so many emails and people coming up to me directly, and they could be fellow physicians. When the interesting story I should say is that when we first started talking about the vaccine, I had several emergency physicians and colleagues come up to me and ask, "Are you going to get the vaccine?" And I was like, "Of course I am." But there was a lot of concern initially, and I think that as we go further along, these concerns will be addressed. So we're going to start with a very science-heavy slide, okay? People talk about whether or not this vaccine, since it is an mRNA vaccine, will it alter our DNA, okay? So this slide, once we process through this slide, we'll realize that it actually doesn't. So if you look on the left there, it talks about the potential DNA vaccines, and then it talks about RNA vaccines. RNA vaccines can't possibly alter DNA because of what it is, okay? So the way that the vaccine works is that these mRNA vaccines are enclosed in a lipid coat to allow that RNA vaccine to enter the cells. Once it enters the cells, then the mRNA is released, and then it interacts with proteins in the cell to build the spike protein. I think you probably heard about what these spike proteins are and how they work. Okay, so what this vaccine is actually doing is giving the code to build parts of the spike protein that can then be taken out of the cell and then recognized by your immune system to fight against it. In no time does this mRNA enter the nucleus where the DNA is, okay? As compared to the DNA vaccine, any potential DNA vaccines, which actually go directly into the nucleus. The COVID-19 vaccine is not a DNA vaccine, does not enter the nucleus, and cannot possibly alter your DNA. So I want to dispel that first myth that we're going to cover. The COVID-19 vaccine alters our DNA. It certainly doesn't, okay? This is what I mean by a little bit of interesting humor here. I got to make it light a little bit at least. Can't possibly alter our DNA. So, maybe we'll still have questions later. I'm happy to address them, but it is not scientifically possible to alter DNA in a person that receives the vaccine. Okay, so that one was pretty straightforward. Let's move on to another myth, okay? The COVID-19 vaccine production was rushed and therefore is too dangerous, okay? So the idea here is that if you think about the timeline, we hear about this horrible condition. We hear about Wuhan and then this infection spreading rapidly, and then within months, all of a sudden they're talking about a vaccine. right? And in the early times, early on in the pandemic, there was some uncertainty about how fast we can get the vaccine out. But lo and behold, here we are, February 2021, approximately a year from the time that we first heard about this disease, and we already have vaccine out, which is in stark contrast to how vaccines have been produced in the past. It's taken years and years, and approvals, and FDA, certain layers of FDA approval, et cetera. So why is this vaccine how could it have been rushed so quickly? And should that cause us to be concerned about it? And I want to say it shouldn't cause concern, because mRNA vaccines are actually a technology that has been studied since the 1990s. And this pandemic became pretty much the first opportunity for researchers to apply this technology to vaccine production. So I created a little timeline here of the history of mRNA vaccines. So back in the 90s, a researcher by the name of Carlo starts researching synthetic mRNA, okay? With the idea that if we can create a vector to build mRNA particles that could be put into a living system that can direct different protein synthesis, then that could kind of be a game changer for a lot of things, whether it's treatment, or vaccine production, et cetera. It took her about a decade of work to get to the point where she was successfully able to inject modified mRNA into the cells, okay? So that's 10 years of work right there. Then over the ensuing 10 years, two scientists who actually end up being the scientists behind Moderna and BioNTech, which was bought by Pfizer, start working on this new finding and start developing modified mRNA to develop vaccines. They weren't even really thinking about COVID-19 because it didn't exist. They were thinking about your run-of-the-mill vaccines, et cetera. So for the next 10 years, they're working on it. They're finding tremendous potential in the technology of mRNA. And then January 10th, the Chinese researchers openly published the genetic code for the novel coronavirus. That becomes key because once you have the genetic code, then you have scientists that say, wow, I could just take that code, build it, and then create a vector and then put it in as a vaccine, create a vaccine through a vector, and then start testing it right away. So that's why between January 10th, 2021 and April 2020, I should say 21, or sorry, 20, I'm sorry, 20. Between January 2020 and April 2020, less than 4 months, we went from identifying a pandemic to creating an mRNA novel coronavirus vaccine. So I think without understanding this timeline, people think that, wow, this just happened overnight. This creates either concern about the vaccine being rushed, or maybe it was some biological, warfare or something like that, but it was nothing like that. So that kind of talks about another potential myth, okay? So that gives us a little bit more understanding about how mRNA vaccines were, the technology evolved over about 30 years, okay? So I want to move on to other myths, and the myths involve basically dealing with the safety profile of COVID-19 vaccines. Okay, so let's move into that. So this is one myth, and I do need to explain this myth a little bit because there's stuff that isn't known quite yet. But one myth, which I will label a myth, is that the COVID-19 vaccine can cause COVID-19. Okay, so on the one hand, it's actually impossible for the COVID-19 vaccine to cause COVID-19, right? Because the vaccine actually doesn't contain the virus. The vaccine actually has the code for the spike protein that can then be used to make spike protein through your immune system response, and that's how you gain protection, okay? Now the question then becomes, but can it cause COVID-19 test results to be positive? Okay, so there's a distinction, okay? One, I'm saying that it can't cause COVID-19. However, it might cause false positive COVID-19 test results depending on the test. So let me explain that for a second. Early on, there was different ways to test for COVID-19, okay? There was the antigen tests and the PCR testing, and early on, the sensitivity and the accuracy of these testing were at question and unknown at some point. And so what ended up happening is that there were a lot of companies that made COVID-19 tests, right? Some of them were better than others. Some of the tests test different parts of the viral particle. So it's theoretically possible that some of the COVID-19 tests can identify the spike protein and therefore cause a false positive. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that the COVID-19 vaccine may cause a false positive test result, but it is not the actual COVID-19 illness. And you don't get the long-lasting problems of COVID-19, whether they may be lung problems, the chronic fatigue issues, and then other things that we still don't know that may develop over time, okay? So the reason why, and I'd mentioned this, the reason why the COVID-19 vaccine can't cause COVID-19 is because it only has the mRNA. It doesn't actually have viral particles, okay? So the way that the COVID vaccine works is that it actually mimics infection. So it doesn't cause infection. It tricks your immune system into thinking it's infected without all the bad effects, long-term effects, and the actual disease pattern. You don't get lung problems. You don't get any of that. You just get that immune response feeling, which we'll talk about in a bit in terms of the side effects. So here's something that's really interesting. Again, it gets a little bit deep into virology and immunology, but I want to explain why the technology of the COVID-19 vaccine far surpasses traditional vaccines, okay? So the way that the COVID vaccine works is that it induces two types of immune response in your body. One, it induces your body to build up antibodies that can recognize the spike protein and then fight infection if you subsequently get infected with COVID-19, okay? The second thing that typical vaccines don't do is that the COVID-19 vaccine also triggers a killer T cell response. And let me explain the difference. Antibodies identify infection of a virus in your system before the virus has entered the cell, okay? So it's almost like the first line of attack. You know, as virus particles or live virus enters your nose or your lungs, it notices it and it starts to fight it. But these viral antigens become more, these viral infections can progress when they enter the cell and start creating havoc, okay? Now, once that happens, the T cells in your system are triggered to respond because of the COVID vaccine. So it induces two immune responses in your system. The older vaccines or the traditional vaccines typically do not. So that's probably why it is a much more effective vaccine than the older vaccines. They described a 95, 94% protection rate. It's partly because of this. And that's why this technology is pretty exciting. Okay. All right. So now there's another myth. And again, I've had friends, close friends and acquaintances and that ask about this. Again, healthcare workers and non-healthcare workers. COVID-19 vaccine myth. COVID-19 vaccine is not safe in pregnancy or in childbearing women. Okay. Now, the reason why this has gained a little bit of traction is because there was concern about this mRNA, whether or not it would trigger an immune response that can later prevent women from becoming pregnant or continuing a pregnancy in a normal way. And it's just not borne out, okay? And there are certain sequences within the mRNA that people were concerned about. But at the end of the day, my argument here is that this is a myth because this vaccine, both through the testing that was noted originally through Pfizer and Moderna, as well as the continuing vaccination of the rest of the world, is showing that it is incredibly safe. So there's a position statement of various societies that have basically recommended the COVID-19 vaccine. The American College for Obstetrics and Gynecology recommends that it should be available to pregnant women. The Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine and Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine also feel that it is safe and will not affect breast milk. And then if you look on the other side, you know, getting COVID-19 while you're pregnant is incredibly dangerous. Pregnant women who contract COVID-19 are 5 times more likely to be in the ICU and receive intensive care, and more likely to die from COVID-19 than non-pregnant women. And you know, in terms of vaccinations generally, it's routinely recommended that pregnant women continue with vaccines because of, and noting their safety. So in the setting of that, and with the importance of protecting the pregnant women and the pregnancy, it makes much more sense to recommend the COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant women. In fact, during the studies of the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, 18 women actually became pregnant during the vaccine studies, and none of them miscarried. So that's some preliminary data with regards to this. I anticipate that there may be more information and prospective research on the safety of COVID-19 vaccine in pregnancy. So spread the word. I know some women are either delaying or not taking the COVID-19 vaccine because they want to get pregnant, for example, and I just don't see any scientific basis for doing so. Okay. Another myth is that the side effects of COVID-19 vaccine are dangerous. Well, generally speaking, they're not dangerous at all. So there was a survey that looked at the reasons for people to not want to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Probably the most common concern was that of the potential side effects. And if you all are reading the stories about how healthcare workers in various regions of the United States are delaying their vaccine, it is for the same reasons that we've noted before. It's because I'm concerned about side effects. There's not enough research on it. It was made too quickly. So all those things, all these myths that we have that we're talking about, that I'm directly addressing on this talk, have contributed to a concern and delay in receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. But at the end of the day, if you really want to look at the statistics, this is how safe the vaccine is. So as of yesterday, 64.2 million COVID-19 vaccine doses were administered in the US, 212 million in the world, okay? And before they were rolled out, Pfizer and Moderna studied the vaccine in over 72,000 volunteers, okay? The common side effects that were noted, most common pain at the injection site, headache, fatigue, and dizziness. The symptoms seemed to be worse after the second dose, and the symptoms lasted no more than 2 days, generally speaking. And that was pretty much it. And so when you think about a study or the power of a study to determine whether it's efficacy or some other aspect that you're studying, the power of this is that this is rapidly being administered, and it continues to demonstrate the safety of these vaccines when 64.2 million vaccines are already administered, okay? So there is some potential danger, and the one danger is the potential for allergy, okay? So one of the things that should be brought as a caution is that if someone has a potential allergy to any of the components of the vaccine or allergy to vaccines generally, then this is a discussion between that person and the physician that's ordering the vaccine, okay, or the nurse that's providing the vaccine, for example. So anaphylaxis or extreme allergic response to the COVID-19 vaccine, for example, between December and January, a 1 month time, there were 62 cases out of basically 62 cases, which came out to about 4.5 cases per million. So it's exceedingly rare to have anaphylaxis. This is in comparison between the 1.5 cases per million of the flu vaccine and the 9.6 cases per million of the shingles vaccine. So it's right in the middle in there, and we're don't seem to be nearly as concerned about flu or shingles, and yet for some reason, because of the COVID-19 vaccine being released so quickly, there's concern. At the end of the day, this is really no different from the existing vaccines. There's been some follow-up, or not follow-up, but monitoring of complications after the vaccine. It's noted that there were 113 deaths, but they did an analysis, and it was determined that none of these deaths were actually related to the vaccine. When you consider the fact that in the early part of this vaccine being rolled out, many of the people were elderly and had a lot of comorbidities. And so these 113 deaths were analyzed, and it was found that none of these deaths were actually related to the vaccine at all. Okay, so we talked about the science, we talked about the safety. Let's talk about how the vaccine works. Does it in fact work? So here's one myth. Once I get the COVID-19 vaccine, once I get COVID-19, I don't need to get the vaccine at all, okay? This was something that I experienced directly. I've had a couple of colleagues, doctors and nurses that contracted COVID-19 early on during this pandemic. And then when the vaccine became available for healthcare workers, they approached me and they said, I don't think I need the vaccine. And when they approached me, there was less information. But again, if you're following everything in the media and all the studies that are coming out, there's new information coming every day. Some of the articles that I'm citing are literally from today or yesterday in this talk. But now that we know more about the vaccine, it turns out that even if you have COVID-19, that it's probably better that you get the vaccine as well. So this was a study that has shown, and there's more studies that are showing this as well, that for people that have contracted COVID-19 or a history of COVID-19, that it's actually beneficial to get the vaccine, okay? So the reason being is that the COVID-19 infection can be incredibly variable. Some people get mild or asymptomatic infections. And so the concern is if you're not really having that huge immune response, then what are the chances that your immunity will wane over time? You know, maybe it's only going to last 3 months or 4 months, and then all of a sudden you're going to get reinfected. And in fact, it was found that there was a rare incidence of reinfections to COVID-19 months later. So there are studies now coming out that are showing that if people that were previously infected with COVID-19 received a single vaccine, it reboosts their immune system to produce more antibodies. So it actually levels the playing field for these people with prior infections to get the same immunity compared to the people that have received 2 doses of the vaccine. They're also indicating that they didn't need a second shot, okay? So there's clearly benefit. There is the potential for reinfection, and in fact, the potential for reinfection to variants, in which case, if there's a chance that this vaccine can protect people, even though they've already had it before, then that's the reason to get this vaccine. Okay. So let's talk about the benefit to society for COVID-19 vaccine, okay? So here's another myth. Once I get the vaccine, I don't have to wear a mask. We all got excited. I got excited. And then I started to read information about the vaccine and started to read why the CDC and other experts recommend that we still need to wear a mask, and it all made sense. Okay, so let's talk about that. So how the COVID-19 vaccine works is that it boosts your immune response so that you can recognize your immune system can recognize COVID-19 once you're infected. So that's the key point, once you're infected. So what we don't know is if you're infected, if a person that's received the vaccine gets infected, how much chance do you have to transmit that infection, despite the fact that you're having mild symptoms, right? Because what COVID-19 vaccine is supposed to do is to reduce the COVID-19 infection to very minimal symptoms, reduce your risk of hospitalization or respiratory failure, needing to be placed on a ventilator or ICU admission, et cetera, right? That's what it's supposed to do. But what that means is that you still could get the infection. So the question then became, we don't know how long or how it affects transmission, okay? So because we don't know that, the initial recommendations, and again, it's going to continue to be the recommendations, that even after you're vaccinated, you should still wear a mask, social distance, et cetera. But I want to caveat that by saying that, again, this information is evolving, okay? The knowledge of COVID-19 vaccination is evolving to the point where we might know more information that does show that it does affect transmission. And actually, most recently, we found that it does. So this is from today, February 23rd, the growing evidence that COVID-19 vaccines can reduce transmission, okay? The very question that's posed, the very question that needs to be answered to help us determine if we need to wear masks or not, right? If we had a vaccine that eliminated transmission completely, then we wouldn't need masks. So the question is, can this at least reduce transmission? So there's some initial studies that are starting to show that it actually reduces the risk of infection. So there was a study in the UK and two studies in Israel that have shown that if you vaccinate hospital workers in a hospital, then the overall infection rate in that whole area reduces dramatically, whether they're asymptomatic cases or symptomatic cases. So what that must mean is that for the people that didn't get the vaccine, that they're actually experiencing a reduced rate of infection because of those that are getting vaccinated. So that tends to suggest that transmission is reduced. Okay, so what we still don't know is how impactful that is. The moral of this story is that we still should wear masks. We still should be careful because there could still be potential for transmission. It doesn't reduce it, it doesn't eliminate it, it only reduces it. Okay. All right, here's another myth. The COVID-19 vaccine doesn't help since 99% of people survive COVID-19. Okay. To that, I have this facial expression. I don't understand that at all. I'm going to do my best to explain, because when you think about it, a vaccine strategy is for a community, right? It's to prevent infection and spread. It is not just for the individual. It's so that I can be protected, but I could also protect people around me should I get infected, okay? So knowing that, it's important to identify that just because 99%, and again, that's not necessarily true, just because 99% don't get, let's say, like get serious COVID infection, doesn't mean that for that 1%, I don't know what that percentage is, it's probably more than that, there's a percentage of significant COVID-19 infection, and then there's a percentage of mortality. If we could prevent that, that is important. The reason why it's important to prevent that is because of the capacity of our healthcare system. Okay, so let's explain that. You've heard of the phrase flattening the curve. The importance of flattening the curve is so that we could prevent the number of serious cases of COVID-19 so that our healthcare system, our hospitals, our doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers are not inundated with this infection with patients in the hospital. We've seen it with the tragic events in Italy where they got overrun quickly, and then healthcare became scarce for everyone else, even those that potentially would have gotten only mild infection from COVID-19. So the importance of obtaining herd immunity, okay, which is the idea that if you get enough people protected from infection, whether through actual infection or through a vaccine, then the spread of the spread of the infection will diminish and then subsequently die off. The importance of herd immunity is to prevent the overutilization of healthcare systems that is important for our society to run healthcare, whether it's treating heart attacks or strokes, car accidents, etc. Just anecdotally, in my ER, when COVID-19 started to get pretty impactful, it became very difficult because all of our focus was on treating very, very sick patients in our ICU systems. This was across the country, okay? All of our ICU beds were being filled up, okay? When you fill up ICU beds, then it becomes more difficult to treat all other conditions as well. So let's talk about pathways to community protection, the so-called R0. And I need to define R0. R0 is the idea that for each person that's infected, when a person gets infected, how many people do they infect, okay? So this is an epidemiology statistics concept. And to make it pretty simple, if you have an R0 of greater than 2, meaning let's say that we're in a scenario right now where if I get infected, then the numbers bear out that I'm going to infect 2 other people. That's uncontrolled epidemic spread. That's the equivalent, uncontrolled epidemic spread. That's the equivalent to no intervention. That means all these cases are going to skyrocket high, and then all these ICU beds will be full. It'll be disaster, and it has been disaster in certain regions of the world, okay? And then the next one down, if you have an R0 of 1 to 2, meaning one person infects between 1 and 2 people, it's what's called the controlled epidemic spread. So it still potentially could be close to pandemic, but it's spreading. But we start to approach a scenario where all our resources aren't potentially being overutilized. If we go down to an R0 of less than 1, which means if I get infected, I infect less than 1 person on average, then that means that we can protect our healthcare system capacity. It requires a lot of intervention. For example, hygiene and safety measures, social distancing, cleaning surfaces, and certainly prolonged lockdown would do that too. What's the cost of that though? The cost of a prolonged lockdown we've experienced, in some regions of the United States, we've experienced extreme problems with that, right? So the problems that we've seen, the unintended consequences of a lockdown is what we're trying to deal with now, right? Whether it's mental illness, we see our kids that are not going to school, they're not socializing, the extreme amount of depression, anxiety, etc. Businesses have closed, and so a huge financial burden because of a lockdown during a pandemic. Incidentally, divorces are on the rise as well. So there's a lot of unintended consequences of a pandemic lockdown. I want to focus on the mental health because it's a bit frightening, okay? So here we are trying to do the best that we can in this pandemic, trying to flatten that curve, but in doing so, before the vaccine, all we had in order to really try to limit the spread of COVID-19 was protection measures such as social distancing and going all the way to lockdown. So we've locked down here at various times during this pandemic, and it's caused a lot of problems. When you look at pediatric mental illness and COVID-19, there were several surveys. These are international surveys, some in China, some in other places. They noticed that the kids were having increased depressive scores, whether they were just informal surveys or formal surveys like PHQ-9 and GAD-7. There's been parental surveys that have shown that kids are really getting a tremendous impact in terms of emotional and behavioral change as well. So it's important to note that we need to open our schools again. This is, again, I'm a pediatrician, I'm an ER doc. I know how important it is to slow down this pandemic, but I know how important it is to get our kids back into society, socially integrated, etc. Okay. And in fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics, my college, also recommends measures to allow students to return to school safely. Okay, and what does that mean for schools? It means science-driven information. okay? So information validated that can lead to school policies that make it safe for kids to return. Physical distancing, mask wearing, hand hygiene, all these things are things that we've implemented in our society, and they need to be continued as we open up our schools. Encouraging outdoor spaces, open windows and ventilation, symptom screen. It's funny, not funny, haha, but interesting that, you know, before this pandemic, all this stuff would seem like, wow, that's not doable. But now ask yourself the question today. It's definitely doable, okay? And other things are testing for symptomatic and suspected exposures, providing behavioral and emotional support for children as well, okay? So because we went into a deep dive into pediatric mental illness, it kind of made me realize something. Going back to flattening this curve, when we tried to flatten it with a lockdown, it had so many unintended consequences that were negative, and unfortunately, it may take us time to see all the negative effects as we move forward. But another way we can do it is the widespread COVID-19 vaccine administration, right? Instead of lockdowns, this vaccine gives us an opportunity to open our schools, open businesses, keep them open, okay? And really make a difference socioeconomically for people, okay? All right, so the way to prevent lockdown recurring, okay, especially when you consider that there's the potential for variants, seasonal changes in COVID-19 virus or the coronavirus, then this vaccine becomes critical. So the steps are, if we adopt COVID-19 vaccine effectively, it reduces hospitalizations and ICU utilization. That subsequently flattens the curve, and then it prevents lockdowns by saving businesses, reducing mental illness, stabilizing families, and opening a global economy. As you can see, we still aren't able to freely fly anywhere without other safeguards, but once the vaccine is administered throughout the world effectively, we can. Okay. So let's talk about, I think this is the last myth. COVID-19 vaccine has a microchip that will track our activity. And I don't even know how to respond to that. I think it's ridiculous. I can't even scientifically respond to that. So I'm just going to make a joke out of it. So, and that's my expression. All right, so now I'm going to predict what life is going to look like with this the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, okay? One, this is the COVID-19 vaccines will soon be able to be used under 16 of age. Once it is demonstrated that it is equally safe below 16 as it is above 16, then it'll be used, okay? The next prediction is that mRNA technology will be used in other vaccines and will be able to prevent serious illness due to other infections, for example. I look forward to that as well. Unfortunately, there may be some seasonal mRNA vaccines because of variants that are occurring. So it remains to be seen how significant that will be. But there are lots of variants. The novel coronavirus is rapidly mutating. So this will become probably a seasonal vaccine in my prediction. And then the final prediction is that masks are not going away anytime soon, just because we should be focused on reducing the transmission and using every means to do so, whether it's vaccines and masks and social distancing and other things. But I want to propose that we do all the things to prevent another lockdown because the unintended consequences are severe. So, conclusions, the truth of COVID-19 vaccines, okay, the facts. It does not alter DNA. It does not cause COVID-19. There are no microchips in them, okay? They actually work and protects against serious COVID-19 infections, okay? Pregnant women are more likely to die of COVID than non-pregnant people. Hence, there is an argument for pregnant women to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. And a corollary of that is that the COVID-19 vaccine does not appear to affect fertility at all, okay? And then finally, it is the safest way for communities to safely open up and prevent further lockdowns. What we don't know yet for sure is the safety studies, that is the use of COVID-19 in children, and the safety studies are ongoing. I do predict that they will be safe. It has not been formally tested in pregnant and breastfeeding mothers, but again, there's extrapolations to indicate that it is safe, okay? And then because of variants and of the COVID-19, the vaccine will probably become a seasonal vaccine. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and let's see what our questions are.
Thank you very much, Carlo. That was very interesting, and loved your pictures and your humor in there. I have a couple of questions, and anybody who continues to have questions, if you can put them in the chat, that would be great. And the first one I got was, is there a problem for patients receiving immunotherapy for seasonal allergies?
Oh, interesting. It remains to be seen. Okay, so immunotherapy, what does immunotherapy do, right? So it is affecting your immune system in some way. Then the question becomes, if you're affecting your immune system with COVID-19, is it going to somehow impair or reduce your immune response if you're receiving immunotherapy for something else? And we talked about B cell and T cell immunity. Immunotherapy for allergies tends to be more of a T cell response. There needs to be more studies on that.
So that brought the question to my own mind. What about people who are receiving immunotherapy for organ transplants, to keep from rejecting?
Sure. Again, there's going to be this mRNA technology is going to launch all kinds of research on all these different aspects. And I'm not a immunologist or a virologist, so I'm speaking on behalf as an ER physician. I do want to say that the mRNA technology seems so incredibly precise in terms of how it works. When you think about, you're talking about genetic code that is being used to create a vaccine, right? So again, speculatively, I would imagine that some of the studies that would identify interactions between different types of immunotherapy should probably identify minimal, if not significant. But at the same time, without having those studies, it's pretty hard to comment on.
More to come.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, my husband is 63 and has had stage 4 metastatic. Oh, I apologize. I didn't write it and it jumped. So now I need to find it. My apologies.
Melanoma and renal cell carcinoma.
Right. When will he be able to get the COVID vaccine? And this is everybody's question, correct?
Yeah. So I'm reading information about LA County expanding, going on to the next tiers, including teachers and the remainder of the healthcare force, et cetera. And in different, again, this is really a regional question, because in some other states they may be able to move up the tiers faster, so to speak. But what I'm also reading is a lot of positivity about releasing this vaccine to everyone eventually. So I would imagine, I don't have actual answers for you, but I would imagine within the next several months, if not even sooner, then this will be opened up for under 65. I think in March, LA County is opening it up to the next tier as well.
Yes. So Lynette shared that she has 2 friends with transplants, 1 heart and 1 kidney, and their MDs had them get the vaccine. So I thought you might find that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we all have, some of us have family members who are sickly and under the age of 65. I know I do. And we're watching that like a hawk. I have read some information about that vaccine being accessible for the people with chronic conditions under the age of 65 very soon, and I believe it's in March.
Wow, the Ventura County Health Officer today stated we should be back to normal by end of summer. What are your thoughts?
Um, I'm optimistic. I think that again, what we're seeing, and is and in my hospital and across the country, the number of cases are starting to go down, and um, I think the vaccine has something to do with that. And I think that as we roll it out even more, this is happening at a much faster pace. If you would have asked me 4 months ago, I would have said no way. I would have said more like
Here.
early 2022. The
Mhm.
thing is that it's nice that we're going to get it before the next fall because there's going to be some seasonal variants that are come. So it's better to get further along in controlling this pandemic before that. So I'm very optimistic.
So, two things on that. The variants coming, the more people who get vaccinated, the better the battle is against the variants, correct?
Yes.
And then somebody thought, what about the next flu season? And we've noticed this has been a very low flu season,
Yes.
and that's because we wear masks, wash our hands, and stay
Yes.
apart.
Yes. I don't think I was just talking to someone about this. I've only heard of 2 positive flu cases among my colleagues at my hospital. There's probably more, but that just tells you how rare it is right now because it's not as infective, in which case the mask wearing really easily prevents the flu. What an interesting lesson, right? We could literally
Mhm.
prevent the flu with a mask.
Yep. So, about ibuprofen, does it really exacerbate the virus?
So there's some concern potentially that if you're using ibuprofen, which is an anti-inflammatory, then if you're using it right around receiving the vaccine, then it might impair your immune response by its anti-inflammatory effects. Um, it could be theoretical or more than theoretical. At the end of the day, we don't know enough about the variations in the immune response of the body. So all we're really saying, I think all the experts are really saying is, give yourself the best chance at the highest immune response, the most robust immune response possible. Don't take it around the clock if you don't have to, that type. Because whatever side effects you're going to have, by and large, are not life-threatening. You're going to get through it, and
Mm.
then in a day, your immune system is going to be that much stronger.
So, what if I haven't had the vaccine and I've had symptoms resembling the virus? Should I not take Advil or ibuprofen? Should I take Tylenol instead?
Let's say if you have COVID-19, is that the question?
If you
Uh,
have symptoms that could be COVID-19.
that goes back to one of the slides I was presenting, that there is a variability in terms of the immune response in people to actually being infected with COVID-19. And that's why the experts recommend even those that have been infected to receive at least one dose. Again, it's probably a little bit more than a theoretical concern. Is Tylenol going to be better and allow you to have more of an immune response? Maybe. That's the best I could do in terms of that answer.
Okay, you're doing a great job. Somebody asked, what is normal? What do we see as normal? Is that going to be mask? Is it going to be being able to eat together, unrestricted travel? I have to tell you, flying to Michigan was not a comfortable ordeal.
Yeah, it's a new normal. The question is, what's going to be the new normal? I think and I think I suggested it in one of my last slides, a mask is the new normal. I remember not too long ago when we would see other countries wearing masks, we would scratch our head, and no one's scratching their heads now. I think that the new normal is being really careful with hygiene um, and staying at home when you're sick instead of being forced to go to work or feeling like you need to go to work. I think no one's going to want you to go to work at this point. You should just stay home. Um, I do think that the new normal may include really wondering what sports events are going to be like and and concerts and things like that. What
What,
that's going to look like.
what about visiting our loved ones in assisted living and nursing homes? That's not happening, and people are really missing their loved ones
Yeah,
and their friends.
it's another unintended consequence of this pandemic is the quarantine aspects of this is just staggering in terms of what it does for to harm families.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, our best hope to achieving normal, or the closest we can to get to normal, is
This
actually going to be
vaccine.
this vaccine.
Yep. Amen. So this was an interesting question. Is there a connection between COVID and thrombocytopenia? Should a patient get the second vaccination after developing thrombocytopenia?
Oof. I
And
don't.
you might want to explain what that is because not everybody will know.
So it's a low platelet count. Is thrombocytopenia. Whether or not that is related in any way to improvement or detriment in with regards to the vaccine, I really don't know. What it does make me think of is that the COVID-19 infection actually increases thrombotic events and the potential for pulmonary embolism. So there is an impact on the infection itself to cause changes in the way your blood system works, right? Now that being said, having the vaccine, like I said this before, the COVID-19 vaccine tricks your body into feeling like it's infected by inducing an immune response without causing all these other effects. So that's another thing that the COVID-19 vaccine doesn't do, is it shouldn't affect anything else other than your immune system, right? So you won't have the lung problems, you won't have the blood problems, you won't have any of the other problems, and it makes sense, right? It's not, there's no virus in the vaccine, okay? So I kind of thinking about it scientifically, I'm not sure if there will be necessarily any impact on blood dyscrasias like thrombocytopenia.
Wow. This is not a question. This was great, a great response. Yes, bravo, Dr. Reyes, great presentation. Excellent, thank you so much. If there are no other questions, I have one, and I kind of know the answer, but it's really bothering me. So we have friends, and we want to get together in our backyard, and all four of us have been vaccinated. Could we get together in our house without our masks?
That's a good question. I think we need to think about, when we think about this infection, we need to think about our sphere of influence, right? So when you're talking about just the four people, then you're probably safe, right? Let's say that of the four of you, three of you have been social distancing and one hasn't, right? Let's say that you're the one that hasn't is going to be safe because they have the vaccine, but they are technically infected. What that means is that person can spread it to the other three, but those three won't have any serious infection. But as soon as they go home, as soon as they go
spread it,
either other people, their circle, and let's say some of them haven't gotten the vaccine, the concern is that we could still be partners of spread, even though we have the vaccine. So to answer the question, again, it's in line with the CDC and all the experts. We still should be wearing masks. We should be careful. We should still be staying within our circle, so to speak. Again, this isolation aspect has been so damaging to so many people in so many ways. You need to feel connected to people. You need to feel connected to your family. Just pick the ones you want to connect with and just stick with them for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a final question here. Can we get copies of the screen information from this presentation? So that is a good lead in to say, yes, this has been recorded. It will be put on the website for the Ventura County Coalition for Compassionate Care, which is vcccc.org. And you will be welcome to see it there probably within a week. There are other videos that we have had done that you can access there. Plus, there is a video of Carrie Kasem interviewing people regarding end-of-life planning, advanced care directives. That is really worth watching. It's about 12 minutes, and it has a lot of answers in there. So very good stuff. If you are very interested, we would love to have you as a member of the Coalition for Compassionate Care. We are always looking for members, and we are looking for committed people to help us make more planning like this, to have these amazing webinars or forums. So thank you very much, Carlo. I appreciate your time. I would like to give us a clap. I hope you can see people. They've got all their screens closed, but I thank you very, very much. I think this was very, very good and very educational. So I look forward to being able to see it on the website myself, which again is vcccc.org.